that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
A large, hairy creature with arms that hang down beside bore down on its sides.
And I told him my name, and when I told him the name, he said he was called Code.
It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of.
You're listening to the Strangeology podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Foran, and this is your place to explore the weird, strange, and unexplained. From cryptids and creatures, the paranormal, aliens and UFOs, forbidden knowledge, ancient mysteries, conspiracies, and more. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. On this edition of the show, I'm going to be diving into the fascinating Ancient Equator, or Great Circle Theory. If you like ancient mysteries or shows like Ancient Apocalypse and often wonder about the origins of human civilization, definitely stick around. Also, thank you for bearing with me, as it did take a little bit of extra time due to my busy schedule to get all the research done for this one and to make it all cohesive and make sense, because this is a very complex topic. It's going to be a very dense episode with a lot of details. We'll be visiting a lot of different places around the world, a lot of ancient sites, and you'll find out why this took me so long to put together. So since this one is going to be jam-packed, we're going to just dive right in. So make sure to stick around until the end of the episode for any updates and other information. So without any further ado, enjoy the show. You've probably been taught in school about humanity's ancient history. Our ancestors built the first civilizations and these marvelous megalithic sites out of stone, places like the Giza Plateau, with all the constructs there like the pyramids, the Sphinx, and other sites like Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Machu Picchu in Peru, Stonehenge in England, or the Moai statues on the island of Rapa Nui or Easter Island. These places have fascinated and puzzled historians and archaeologists alike for centuries, and we've found out a lot about these sites. There's much information to learn and find out, but what if I told you that there could be a hidden pattern linking all of these sites together in ways that you might not expect? What if they weren't just mere monuments and temples to forgotten rulers and gods separated by time and vast distances, but rather they're beacons of a bygone era, a time when humanity's reach stretched beyond the horizon, guided by some cosmic compass, and that we're only just beginning to comprehend this connection? Well, some out there have proposed that there is something more going on here with something called the Ancient Equator or Great Circle Theory. And according to this idea, there is this hidden pattern within these megalithic monuments, and they aren't just scattered randomly across the globe. Instead, this theory proposes that they were built on specific places with the intention to align them in this near perfect circle along what these researchers believe was Earth's ancient equator up until the last ice age. And if this is true, it would rewrite the whole of our understanding of human history and the understanding of our origins. This theory suggests that these alignments could be evidence of a kind of progenitor civilization, one that existed thousands of years before we're aware of, something completely prehistoric, a civilization that may have had advanced knowledge of geography, astronomy, and perhaps even technology that spanned the planet. Imagine a world where these ancient civilizations, separated by vast oceans and continents, share this profound connection, this alignment that seems to transcend time and borders. Could this all be true? Is it possible that these ancient sites are remnants of a kind of lost world, a world that flourished during the Ice Age and then vanished almost overnight in a cataclysmic event. There is a phrase that keeps coming around more and more that we're beginning to hear as new evidence comes to light, which is that things just keep getting older. Now, I'm not an archaeologist, but I do have a fascination and interest in this subject. I've always loved looking into ancient sites like the Giza Plateau with the Great Pyramids, or all of the sites in Peru like Machu Picchu and all those places. Now, the Ancient Equator theory begins with this fascinating observation. If you take a map of the Earth and plot the locations of several key ancient sites, places like the Great Pyramid of Giza, Easter Island, the Nazca Lines in Peru, and several others across the globe, you'll find something kind of strange. They appear to align along this single circle that some are calling the Great Circle that wraps around planet Earth. Of course, not all ancient megalithic sites fall on this line. I would say that the majority don't, but proponents of this theory don't believe that this is coincidence. The first person that we know of to make this connection was a French archaeologist and ethnologist named Francis Mazier, who dedicated his life to exploring the Amazon and trying to unravel the mystery of the Moai statues on Easter Island. And during his research in 1965, he realized that Easter Island, all the sites in Peru, and Giza in Egypt all aligned along this straight line. And this idea would be expanded upon in the decades that followed. Now, the Earth's equator today is understood as being 0 degrees latitude dividing the northern and southern hemispheres of the planet. And this imaginary line has a circumference of around 24,900 miles. We all learned this in school, hopefully. But has the equator and the tilt of the Earth always been the same as it is today? Those who subscribe to this ancient equator theory believe that this alignment coincides with where an ancient equator would be that was rapidly changed somehow by some cataclysmic event. And this is a little bit different than the precession of the equinoxes, which is also very interesting and could potentially tie into this as well, thinking about archaeoastronomy and that kind of thing. But if this cataclysmic event happened and there were humans back then, we know there were, that managed to achieve high civilization with technology and all of that, this event would have had to have been so massive that any civilization that was on Earth at the time would have been wiped out and lost to time, completely erased from the record. But can this kind of thing actually happen? Well, I found out that the answer is a very concerning yes. Earth has had its series of massive natural disasters and mass extinctions before. We're in what's considered to be the 6th great extinction on the planet right now. But in the past, we had the Great Dying, or the Permian extinction event that happened 252 million years ago, when tons of volcanoes erupted in what is now Siberia, which caused the elimination of around 90% of all of the species on Earth at the time. Crazy event. There was also Snowball Earth, and there's supervolcanoes like the one at Yellowstone that periodically go off. There's asteroid impacts like the one that's believed to have caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. There's been magnetic pole reversals, which we are apparently long overdue for, although it's unclear that that type of event would cause a mass extinction. Now, there is also this other idea that I found of a geographical pole shift or a crustal displacement, which has been proposed by several researchers over the years, most notably by university professor and author Charles Hapgood. Hapgood believed that Earth's outer crust can actually periodically shift in a dramatic event, causing the geographical poles of Earth to change location over a very short period of time. If you've ever seen the movie 2012, that apocalyptic thriller movie that was based on the Mayan 2012 prophecy, it used this idea of a rapid crustal displacement, which in the end totally resurfaced the planet. There was that scene where Los Angeles was sinking into the ocean and there were massive tidal waves washing over the United States and India, and everything just got totally messed up. Fun movie for sure if you haven't seen it, but that's kind of the idea of the extent of the damage that something like that would cause. But while there hasn't necessarily been any concrete evidence or proof found of a crustal displacement like that in the geological record, there was a recent study that found around 84 million years ago that the planet tilted dangerously on its side in this kind of cosmic yo-yo event. And this phenomena was called true polar wander, and scientists found evidence of this happening in the late Cretaceous period after observing fossils of bacteria that were trapped in these ancient rocks, which had formed the mineral magnetite, which offered clues into the orientation of Earth's axis and its magnetic field back then. Now, the definition of true polar wander is that of a planet or even a moon's rotation with respect to its spin axis that may cause these geographical locations to physically shift and change or wander. This idea might suggest something like crustal displacement theory being possible, where the continental crust may suddenly and catastrophically shift over the mantle. Scientists have found additional evidence of this happening in the distant past, where the eastern part of Asia moved by about 25 degrees south between 174 to 157 million years ago. And it's also believed that moons out in the solar system like Europa or Enceladus have gone through and changed at some point in their history with their crust and orientation by as much as 80 degrees. So this phenomena could happen. It's a little bit concerning. Now, true polar wander shouldn't be confused with a geomagnetic pole reversal, although who knows, that could come into play with this at some point. So what would happen if the Earth's crust tilted suddenly? If it moved about, let's say, 30 degrees different from where it is today? Well, when you shift the Earth's equator 30 degrees in this hypothetical scenario, you start to find some really interesting things along the equator, which would be shifted, that circles the globe. Traces of prehistoric humanity in the form of megalithic building is found, as well as petroglyphs, and all of this stuff starts showing up across this line. Now, we all know that ancient peoples had a knack for moving very large and heavy blocks and often align them to the cardinal directions or to celestial events like the solstice, the equinox, different constellations in the sky. These people were ancient astronomers. There wasn't a lot to do, so people were often looking up towards the sky. Maybe they were trying to find understanding and meaning. Are we alone? This kind of question that's been with us since the beginning. And this is really kind of like an ancient signature for humans who lived back then, that left all this stuff for future generations to decipher their meaning and what they were up to. As we know, there are hundreds of ancient megalithic sites around the world, which we have a good grasp on a number of them that are fairly simple, aligned megalithic columns and blocks and dolmens and all of these places. But some of these massive stones and sites are much more complex, and a lot of them align on this 30-degree different equator. So could there be a connection between many of these sites, which still have a lot of questions to be answered. There's a lot of enigmas out there surrounding many of these places. And of course, like I said, there's megalithic sites all over the world, not just along this proposed ancient equator Great Circle line, but the fact that so many of these more complex sites, ancient cities, and temples are found along this line is weird. It's interesting, but kind of weird. Maybe it's all coincidence. Maybe it's not. Now, the thing is, when you look at this hypothesized equator, you start to find many of these ancient sites have this curious alignment with each other, like Francis Mazier suggested. If you draw a line around the Earth to where this ancient equator would have been, many of these sites here, they fill the area within a margin of error of 1/10 of 1 degree of latitude. Pretty interesting. But is it just coincidence, or is there actually something to this? Well, many believe that there could be. In 2001, a researcher by the name of Jim Allison wrote this essay, which is posted on Graham Hancock's website. If you're familiar with Graham Hancock's work, he has the show on Netflix now, Ancient Apocalypse, about this very theory, and Jim Allison built upon the earlier works of Francis Mazier. So according to Jim Allison, if you start this ancient equator line at the Nazca lines in Peru and then head east along this line, you'll arrive in short order to all of the other sites in Peru like Ollantaytambo, Machu Picchu, Cuzco, Nopal Iglesia, Sacsayhuaman, all of these sites. And then this line travels to the mouth of the Amazon, and from there across the Atlantic Ocean, passing very close to the Cape Verde Islands, which some think is a contender for being one of the possible locations of Atlantis, and then towards the Sahara in Africa. Curiously, while it's a little ways off from the margin of error from the line that's proposed, it does pass within about 100 miles of the Eye of the Sahara, or the Rashat structure in Mauritania. And there are some really interesting theories on that structure regarding Atlantis as well, but that's for a whole other episode. Now, this line then passes all the way to the Giza Plateau in Egypt. Of course, we know how significant that place is. Next, it goes to Petra in Jordan, and then the ancient city of Ur from Sumeria. It then continues on to the ancient city of Persepolis in Iran, to crossing nearby the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan. And this was part of the mysterious Indus Valley civilization, which we still don't know a lot about. It also passes by this site called Khajuraho in India, which is very ancient. And even further still, this line goes right past Angkor Wat in Cambodia, as well as a few other sites in Southeast Asia. From there, it passes by New Caledonia, and nearby there is this mysterious island called Enayadium. And then from there, it goes all the way to Easter Island. And then from there, it reconnects with the Nazca lines in Peru. Now, it should be noted that this line also crosses through many areas which are largely unexplored and unexcavated, in places like the Amazon jungle, which there's a lot of really interesting stuff being found with LiDAR, or the Sahara Desert, or the highlands of New Guinea, where there is still so much to be explored and discovered. It's also interesting that when you look at these ancient sites that have these cities, these civilizations that arose along this line, you also find the world's first known written languages, like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics and Sumerian cuneiform. Most major world religions were also developed along this line, like the polytheistic religion of ancient Egypt, as well as Zoroastrianism from ancient Persia, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and even the ancient religions of Peru and elsewhere in South America as well. Now, there's also some really interesting measurements that have been recorded between all of these sites. If you look at the planet top down, and then have a circle written or drawn out on a piece of paper. Sites like Giza, Angkor Wat, and Easter Island, where the distances between these places comes out to the golden ratio. And there's a lot of calculating and numbers involved, like the distance between these sites. For example, the distance between Angkor Wat and the Nazca lines in Peru is the same distance as Mohenjo-Daro is to Easter Island. Similarly, the distance between Angkor Wat and Mohenjo-Daro equals the distance between Mohenjo-Daro and the Giza Plateau. The Nazca lines to Easter Island is also the same distance to those as well. And then when you start multiplying these distances with the golden ratio, these different distances start equaling each other out. It's much more complicated math that I won't really get into, but the whole thing is very curious. I'll try to find one of my sources that I was looking at has this laid out really well. I'll put it in the show notes for someone who's a little bit better at math than I am, but it's very curious, this kind of distance connection and it all kind of equaling out to these significant types of numbers and mathematics. Maybe it's all coincidence, but if these sites are somehow related to each other, this could be some kind of evidence of this connected civilization with advanced planning, mathematics, understanding of the planet, and this was all laid out with intention for some kind of purpose. Now, why don't we take a look at some of the more well-known and mysterious sites that fall along this ancient equator to see if we can make any significant connections. I'm not going to cover all of them because that would be a 10-part series if I did. So I'll just do a cursory overview of some of the more significant sites and some of the more interesting and mysterious aspects surrounding them. First up, let's start with Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, which is located in the middle of the South Pacific Ocean. It's 2,300 miles off the coast of Chile and 2,500 miles east of Tahiti, the next closest inhabited island in the South Pacific. It's one of the most isolated inhabited islands in the world. And this enigmatic place is, of course, most famous for its iconic massive stone statues known as the Moai. Now, it's believed that a group of Polynesian people who had been island hopping throughout the Pacific settled the island of Rapa Nui between 800 and 1200 CE. And it's believed that they originated from the island of Nukuhiva, which is in the Marquesas Islands. The journey from there to Easter Island is almost 2,400 miles. That's a really long distance to travel, especially if you don't know if there's any more land out there. Some have theorized that there may have been some kind of ancient knowledge passed down of a route for seafarers, that something else was out. But at this point, that's all just speculation. Now, the Moai statues are quite puzzling as well. Some of these statues weigh over 80 tons and stand anywhere from 6 all the way up to 30 plus feet tall. The Rapa Nui people carved out over 1,000 of these statues from volcanic tuffstone from the island's volcano, which, unlike a lot of other megalithic blocks we'll be getting into, is actually a lot easier to work with. It's a much softer stone. Now, it's thought that each Moai was a representation of a real person who once lived on the island as a kind of memorial for them. And it was believed by the Rapa Nui people that these ancestors would offer protection and sustain the island community, ensuring things like agricultural success and personal well-being. They were placed in precise locations all over the island. Most were placed to face inland, but there were some that faced the ocean. You might think that these were just these carved out heads as well, but in actuality, they have these fully carved out bodies. Many of these Moai that were found are buried up to their necks 20 to 30 feet underground. And you can still see unfinished moai in their quarry today. As to how the Rapa Nui people moved these statues isn't totally clear, but one theory suggests that the Rapa Nui people used wooden sleds on roads that they made all over the island, although that theory appears to have been debunked due to the roads on the island being concave, which would make it exponentially more difficult to move the moai in that way. There's another idea that suggests that they were able to stand them up using ropes, and then they kind of teetered them and walked them into their resting places. And the statues, many of them, at least the ones not buried, were placed on these megalithic platforms of interlocking stones that they called ahu, which were also engineering feats themselves. The most well-known of these is the Ahu Vinapu, which features and we'll get into this much more as we travel through these sites, but this infamous polygonal cyclopean masonry, which, again, this is going to be a recurring theme that connects a lot of these sites. And this building technique is just super interesting, and people don't really know how it was achieved even today. Now, another mystery of Easter Island is the Rongo Rongo tablets, which displays a glyph system of writing. And to this day, it remains completely undeciphered. Rongo Rongo is a Rapa Nui word that means to recite, declaim, or to chant out. However, the Rapa Nui people who live there today can't even decipher this ancient script. Now, according to the legend, these tablets were brought from the Rapa Nui homeland, which could be Nuka Hiva or elsewhere in Polynesia. Although there's no evidence of this writing system, to my knowledge, from what I could find, that's been found anywhere else in the Pacific throughout Polynesia. So it's thought that the ancient Rapa Nui people invented this themselves. However, there is one script that looks an awful lot like what we see on the Rongo Rongo tablets, and it comes from the Indus Valley civilization, which I'll get into a little bit more later. Alternatively, the one and only Dr. Robert Schoch, who you might be familiar with if you're into any of this kind of subject matter. He's known for his theories about the Great Sphinx in Giza in Egypt, suggesting that it's far older due to weathering patterns on it. But he's looked at this, he suggested that the Rongo Rongo tablets, the writings on them, could very well be over 10,000 years old. Does that mean that the tablets themselves are that old? I don't think so, but it could be a kind of legacy knowledge that was passed down from long ago. Now, this theory obviously doesn't fit into the established academic understanding of Easter Island or even human history as a whole, because that would mean that somebody was on Easter Island during the last ice age. Now, the reason that Dr. Schoch claimed this was that because in the country of Turkey, there are ancient megalithic sites confirmed to be the oldest known that we know of, when people were supposed to be hunter-gatherers and not builders who had civilization and agriculture. And they have some really very similar symbolism that can be found on the Moai statues. And we're going to get into more about that later. Now, perhaps some of the ancient megalithic stonework was already there, and the Rapa Nui people simply built on top of it. And we'll find that theme again and again as we move forward. And of course, we know that the more modern history of Easter Island, but it seems like if there weren't people there, maybe there were people there. Maybe there was something going on more than we previously thought. And it could be one of these puzzle pieces linking together this ancient equator theory and some kind of global cataclysm, some apocalypse that happened that totally wiped out a previous and lost civilization. Now we're going to head over to South America and to the country specifically of Peru. So Peru has several significant sites that fall along the margin of error from this ancient equator line, most of which are attributed to the Incan Empire, who were known for their megalithic building techniques and terrace farming. Now, the big one here is none other than Machu Picchu, which was built high up in the Andes Mountains of Peru. And it's this stunning example of engineering, which is believed to have been built by the Inca around the 15th century and eventually became a refuge for the Incan people during the Spanish conquest of Peru and South America as a whole. It's thought to have been built initially as a royal retreat for the Incan king Pachacuti, which makes sense for that area as a purpose for what it was used for. Others think that it may have been a trading hub, but there's also clear evidence that it was built as a religious temple and an astronomical observatory, as there are structures there aligned with different celestial events like the solstices and equinoxes. And this time frame is backed up by radiocarbon dating of artifacts found around the site that shows it was in use between 1420 and 1530. Archaeologists have estimated that up to 750 people live there at any given time, although there's only ever been 100 skeletons that have been unearthed there so far. But interestingly, a number of the remains found show that some of the people at Machu Picchu had elongated skulls, which is interesting, especially considering the Paracas culture in Peru, which I think is a little bit too far off of the margin from the Great Circle Line. But yeah, elongated skulls kind of factor into this a little bit too. If you haven't listened to my episode on ancient giants, this all kind of connects to that too. So if you haven't, go back in my catalog of episodes. It's a two-parter. Definitely interesting. That's got a lot of information about elongated skulls. But back to the point. Although it was eventually abandoned, Machu Picchu remained largely hidden from the outside world, save for some grave robbers who may have found it and looted some stuff, up until it was accidentally rediscovered in 1911 by the American historian and explorer, as well as a Yale archaeologist, this guy named Hiram Bingham, who was incidentally on an expedition to find Vilcabamba, which was this lost Incan city and was the last holdout for the Incan people during the Spanish conquest of Peru. Now, there are those who suggest that Machu Picchu could be much older, and this is based on the foundational layers on the site, which are built with this same kind of cyclopean polygonal masonry of different shaped blocks that they fit together like these puzzle pieces, much like the ahu that are found on Easter Island. And then on top is usually a much less sophisticated style of stonework that needed mortar. This cyclopean polygonal masonry fits together so tightly that you can't even fit a sheet of paper or a human hair between them. It's kind of wild. And this style of building, again, is going to show up more and more as we go over different sites around the Great Circle. Even a couple years ago, this Peruvian archaeologist named Jose Bastante, who works at Machu Picchu, discovered a rock outcropping that had been largely ignored and unexplored on top of the mountain that Machu Picchu sits on, which has paintings and rock art and geoglyphs dating back centuries. And there's even some estimates of them dating back thousands of years before the agreed upon date of Machu Picchu's construction. So it's thought that people were actually in this area for a long time before Machu Picchu, even the Incan Empire, existed. So there was some kind of significance and importance to this site. So that's an ongoing developing thing that's being studied. Not much info is available just yet, but that'll be interesting to see what else is found there. Now, just thinking about how Machu Picchu was built, beyond its base layers, just the feat of building this place on top of a mountain in the Andes is wild. While not the same engineering feat as a place like the Great Pyramid, Machu Picchu is impressive in its own right. And it was built, from what we understand, without technology like the wheel or with a written language for planning, large and strong pack animals, or any kind of metallurgy. It's definitely an enigma. It's also at an elevation of 7,972 feet, which makes the work and engineering put into it all the more extraordinary, especially considering the higher elevation, less oxygen. Your body's gonna work a lot harder. People get elevation sickness when they visit Machu Picchu. So, like, how did they do this? How was this possible for these megalithic blocks, some weighing hundreds of tons, made of granite and basalt, to be hauled 1.5 miles up the side of a very steep mountain? It should be noted that these types of rocks are up to an 8 on the Mohs scale of hardness. So without the right tools, they would be extremely difficult to work with. I could keep going about this, but we're going to move on. I also want to mention briefly some other Peruvian sites as well, which share the same kind of megalithic polygonal masonry, which are the Incan sites of Ollantaytambo, which was an Incan fortress. According to what we know, King Pachacuti conquered this place in the mid-15th century and razed the whole town that existed there at the time, which begs the question, what was there already if it got destroyed back then? We know that this town was inhabited by the Quilca people as early as 900 CE, who knew about agriculture, irrigation, ceramics, and megalithic building, which the Inca used as foundations for their later constructions, which is interesting that we have that kind of established, that the Incan people did use older base layers of megalithic blocks beneath their constructions. Now, probably the best known megalithic blocks here are from the Temple of the Sun, which is this wall of these giant blocks that fit together perfectly without mortar, and they weigh over 60 tons each. Some of them have these enigmatic knobs that are also found a lot on these polygonal blocks that aren't quite explained yet. They don't quite work. For the one theory is that they were used for ropes for dragging the rocks, but that doesn't, the physics of it, from what I understand and what I've read, don't necessarily hold up to support that theory. Now, there's also another site that I want to mention, Sacsayhuaman and Cusco, which was the capital of the Incan Empire. And you guessed it, this place also has these massive polygonal megalithic constructs in the form of these walls with granite and diorite stones weighing as much as 120 tons, cut so precisely that they didn't need mortar to hold them in place, and nobody's really quite sure how they built it. Now, I should mention that since we've been talking about all of these polygonal stones, that one theory out there about how these ancient people achieved this building technique was using some kind of geopolymer, something like a concrete mixture where they would pour the mixture into a mold, or that they were able to somehow soften stone to shape it however they saw fit, either by refracting sunlight, like you can light things on fire with a magnifying glass on a sunny day if you angle the glass just right, or perhaps there was some other type of technology involved, like using vibrations, frequency, and sound technology, which there's no physical evidence left behind for most of that. But those are some really interesting theories that could potentially explain how this was done. Now, I do want to mention a couple other sites nearby. They're beyond the margin of most of the sites along the Great Circle, but they're pretty significant. We're going to mention Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia, right near Lake Titicaca. When these sites were found, they looked like they had been destroyed by some cataclysm. Interesting. And Lake Titicaca is the highest navigable freshwater lake in the world, which sits at around 12,500 feet. Now, the archaeological sites here, Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, respectively, are still very much a mystery to this day. The exact purpose for what these sites were used for, the construction techniques, and the origin of who built them isn't really well understood. It's thought that the Tiwanaku civilization flourished from around 500 to 1000 CE, but there's evidence dating these sites back to at least 1500 BCE or older. Now, Tiwanaku is famous for its Gateway of the Sun, which is this massive stone archway carved from a single stone featuring intricate glyphs, as well as a central deity figure, which is thought to be the Andean creator god Viracocha. Some think that this statue and similar ones could represent something like a survivor of an advanced civilization that was destroyed in a giant global cataclysm, going to different pockets of surviving humans around the world to impart knowledge and restart civilization. It should also be noted that back in the 1960s, the Bolivian government initiated an effort to restore Tiwanaku, but the quality of work that was done is nowhere near as high of a quality and precision as the stonework from the original site, that says something. Now, let's move on right next door to the site of Pumapunku. And this site has not been restored. It looks like it was totally destroyed. It has all of these intricately carved stones, which almost look like they were made from some kind of mass production mold. There are these H blocks that fit together, that's thought they fit together, kind of like Lego pieces. And the site also contains massive slabs of andesite stone that are shaped and fit together seamlessly. Some of these weigh over 100 tons, and some of these stones have these precision holes drilled in them. And there's right angles carved into stones, recessed carvings that would be extremely difficult to achieve without the use of modern power tools. And all of this could potentially be evidence of some kind of ancient machining technology at play. Although, from what we know, there isn't anything that was left behind that would 100% confirm that they had some kind of modern technology that they were using. Maybe they were just using hand tools. We don't know. But the mainstream view maintains that the Tiwanaku people had the means to do all this with primitive tools to make these sites. And they had things like saws and hammers and chisels. But there's also the problem of how these stones were transported up into the Andes Mountains from quarries that were miles and miles away across rough terrain without the use of the wheel or strong pack animals. A llama or an alpaca probably isn't going to be enough to help move these stones. You know, a lot of stuff to consider with these sites. It seems like we're really missing a big part of the picture about these places, and the potential for them being far older than the established view would support the idea of an older, potentially globally connected lost civilization, or even a series of civilizations that at the very least communicated with each other, traded ideas and goods with one another. And before we depart from South America, I can't forget about the Nazca lines. The short of it is that these are these series of massive and miles long lines in the Nazca Desert, as well as geoglyphs. And this area covers 200 square miles, and they're thought to have been created between 500 BCE and 500 CE. They were made using a technique called surface scraping, which removed the top layer of these reddish-brown pebbles on the ground to reveal a lighter colored soil beneath. And this all remained mostly intact due to the environment and dryness of the Nazca Desert. Now, beyond the lines, which, by the way, some think look like runways for planes or spaceships and that kind of thing, I'm not saying they are, and I'm not going into ancient alien theory for this, but it is interesting. And the Nazca lines also include these glyphs of animals and plants and geometric shapes, and some are so large that they can only be seen from the air. As it stands, we know that there are over 800 lines, 300 geometric shapes, and 70 plant and animal figures. And some of the most well-known are the spider, the condor, the hummingbird, the monkey, And then there's the infamous Nazca astronaut, which is a humanoid figure with this bulbous head and large eyes, which is interesting. But again, a lot of the ancient alien theorists point to that as being evidence. And of course, there's all sorts of other cave paintings and petroglyphs and geoglyphs that suggest something else might have been happening, but we're keeping this within the realm of humanity for now. Now, to me, it's wild that these lines weren't really noticed in modern times until the 1920s, when some pilots started flying over the Nazca Desert. Locals knew about them because from certain vantage points in the mountains, you can see some of them. And more of these glyphs are still being discovered to this day with the help of artificial intelligence, interestingly enough. There was an article that just recently came out saying over 300 new glyphs were potentially identified in the Nazca Desert using this AI system. Now, the purpose of the Nazca lines still remains a mystery. There are theories ranging from them being astronomical calendars to ceremonial paths. Researchers believe that basic surveying techniques like using stakes and ropes and grids helped the Nazca people create all of these lines and glyphs, which does make sense. That could very well be possible. But the scale at which they were done, having these straight lines go for miles and miles, is pretty wild. I mean, these people had some very advanced knowledge, I would think, to be able to achieve. There's also theories that they were used for religious or ceremonial functions with their society. Perhaps they used them like ritual pathways, walking along the lines and the glyphs, like modern day labyrinth walking, to make offerings to water and fertility deities, as desert life was harsh. And of course, they would need water for agriculture and basic survival in a dry climate. Others suggest that the Nazca lines were a kind of ancient and massive astronomical calendar and observatory, since some of the lines and shapes seem to have astronomical alignments to celestial events. Another observation here is one that Jim Allison made when taking a look at the alignment of the Nazca lines themselves. None of them really point towards any of the cardinal directions, northeast, southwest. However, he found that if you tilt the axis of the Earth to that theoretical 30-degree difference, if the equator the planet physically shifted, not all of them, but many of the lines and glyphs find themselves aligned to an east-west orientation that would follow along this ancient equator. And that's where I'm going to leave things for this episode. There is a lot more to come for this theory, so stay tuned for part 2, which will be dropping next week. And thank you again so much for hanging out with me today. I know this episode is jam-packed full of so much information, and I felt like that Charlie Day meme from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, trying to connect all the dots for this theory. So I hope you all followed along so far and enjoyed today's episode. Next time is going to be even a deeper dive into even more information supporting this theory. So I've done a lot of work on this, and it's going to be wild. I haven't done a 2-parter episode in quite a while. So stay tuned for the next one, everyone. As always, I want to give a huge thank you out there to everyone who checks out the Strangeology podcast. Those of you who download it, share it with friends and family. It helps me out a ton when you do that. The Strangeology podcast wouldn't be possible without the support of listeners like you. The best way to support the show is to tell your friends and anyone who loves listening to stories and theories about the strange and unexplained. And if you want to help support the show, definitely leave a review on your favorite podcasting platform. 5-star reviews help a ton and push the show out to more people. And another way to support the show is by heading over to my Patreon at patreon.com/strangeology. where you can become a member of the show for as little as $1 per month. Any support helps out a ton and helps keep the lights on here at Strangeology HQ. Higher tiers unlock more benefits like early access to episodes and new long-form videos that are also free. You gain access to the members-only episode extension as well, Strangeology Beyond, which is usually a whole other research topic or an extended guest interview. There's also a merch discount for my shop, exclusive merch for members, voting power, and all sorts of other bonus content. So if you want to join a growing community of like-minded people who are into the strange and unexplained, it's really a great place to be. I appreciate the support, and the more of it I get, the more content that I can create for everyone out there. We'll see you there. And to all members out there, thank you so much for your continued support of Strangeology. You're all so amazing. And one more time, that's patreon.com/Strangeology. To any advertisers or companies out there looking to collaborate with the Strangeology podcast, or if you'd like to be considered for an interview on the show, if you're an author, researcher, or expert, please send all business inquiries to info@strangeology.com. And if you haven't yet, make sure to give me a follow over on all of my social media accounts. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, X, and TikTok. I'm most active posting short-form content to Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. So if you're looking for more from me, definitely check that out. As far as the dropping of this episode, November 15th, 2024, I'll be hosting a giveaway on my Instagram since the show just passed 500,000 downloads. Crazy. Thank you so much for liking this show. I so appreciate it, and I want to give a big thanks to everyone out there. So head over to my Instagram for more details. It'll be one of my recent posts if you want to win some Strangeology merch just in time for the holidays. And if you like to read blogs, I also have one over on the official Strangeology website, strangeology.com. The blog has a bunch of articles, and I'm planning on updating it soon with more articles. So you can also sign up to my mailing list as well to receive updates about Strangeology, new posts, get occasional promo codes to my Etsy shop. And if you're looking for one more way to support Strangeology, you can do so by checking out my Etsy shop at strangeology.etsy.com. I've got a whole assortment of cryptid, alien, and Fortean gear available on things like t-shirts, hoodies, sweatshirts, long sleeves, tank tops, and I've also got things like ornaments because upcoming holidays, stickers, magnets, prints, mugs, drink coolers, blankets, enamel pins. There's so much stuff. I just updated the shop with a few new designs, and I have more on the way, so definitely keep checking back. There's something there for everyone. Again, my shop is strangeology.etsy.com. I appreciate the support so much. All right, I think that's all from me for now. I'm going to take a quick break here, and when I come back for Strangeology Beyond, the members-only portion of the show, I'm going to be diving into the mystery of Coral Castle. You won't want to miss it. Members, stick with me, and for everyone else, until the next time, take care of yourselves and each other, and keep it strange. Welcome back, members, to Strangeology Beyond, your exclusive portion of the show. So I'm totally fried after doing the research for today's episode.